The meditation hall on Unity Station smelled of jasmine and old paper. Ambassador Tobias Gray sat cross-legged on a cushion, surrounded by representatives from 17 different species, all listening to his quiet voice read human poetry. His gray hair caught the artificial sunlight streaming through the dome, and his weathered hands held a worn book with gentle reverence. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, he read slowly, letting each word settle. But I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep. A crystalline being named Jenkara, whose body refracted light into rainbow patterns, hummed with appreciation. This frost human understood duty without violence. Your species has such wisdom, Ambassador. Tobias smiled softly. We learned it, Counselor. Sometimes the hardest lessons leave the deepest marks. This was humanity's role in the Galactic Council after 63 years of membership. They were the gentle ones, the philosophers who quoted ancient texts and settled disputes with patient words instead of weapons. While the karate brought military might and the Then offered technological marvels, humans brought something the galaxy had nearly forgotten, the art of listening. Dr. Marcus Webb, a lanky man with kind eyes and perpetually ink-stained fingers, waited by the door. When the meditation session ended, he approached Tobias with unusual urgency. We need to talk. Council chamber. Now. The shift in tone made Tobias's stomach tighten, but he maintained his calm expression. They walked together through the gleaming corridors of Unity Station, past gardens where human musicians taught alien children Earth songs, past galleries where human paintings hung beside swirling karate light sculptures. The emergency session was already underway when they arrived. The circular chamber buzzed with agitated voices. On the central hologram, a world burned. Not with the chaos of natural disaster, but with the methodical destruction of calculated genocide. The Velshera Collective has destroyed the Minnow cluster colonies, Jenkara announced, her usual musical tone flattened by grief. 42 million souls. Gone in 3 cycles. Tobias felt something old stir in his chest, but he kept his breathing steady. He'd practiced this calm for decades. A hulking warrior species delegate named Zet Mora slammed his fist on the table. We must respond with force. This hive-mind abomination respects only strength. Economic sanctions, another voice called out. Diplomatic isolation, suggested a third. A strongly worded condemnation, offered a fourth, to murmurs of agreement. Tobias said nothing. Neither did Marcus. They simply watched as the galaxy's most powerful species debated the gentlest possible responses to mass murder. The Velshera representative, a grotesque fusion of organic matter and metallic implants speaking with 1,000 overlapping voices, seemed almost amused. The collective acknowledges the Council's concern. We will consider your words. It was a dismissal, and everyone knew it. Over the following weeks, the Velshera continued their expansion. 3 more worlds fell silent. The Council issued statements. Human diplomats worked tirelessly to broker peace, offering cultural exchanges, trade agreements, anything to stop the killing. Tobias barely slept. He spent his nights writing letters to Velshera leadership, composing poetry about the value of diverse life, trying every tool in humanity's peaceful arsenal. Marcus stood beside him, equally exhausted, equally determined to find a solution without bloodshed. Do you think they'll listen? Marcus asked one evening, staring at yet another rejected proposal. Tobias looked at his old friend and saw the same thing he felt in himself, hope wrestling with dread. They have to. The alternative is. He didn't finish the sentence. Neither man wanted to speak that possibility into existence. Then came the message that changed everything. Sanctuary Haven, a lush world where humans had built a massive refugee center, housing survivors from a dozen conflicts, went dark. 10,000 refugees lived there. 47 human diplomats. Hundreds of families seeking peace under human protection. The last transmission showed Velshera ships descending like locusts. In the meditation hall where Tobias had once read poetry, alarms now screamed. Jenkara found him standing perfectly still, staring at the hologram of Sanctuary Haven's last moments. Ambassador, I am so sorry, she began. Tobias turned to face her. His eyes held something she'd never seen before in a human, a terrible, ancient clarity. Counselor, please clear the station's eastern docking bay. Why? Because we're going to need the space. His voice remained soft, but something in it made Jenkara's crystalline form vibrate with instinctive fear. And tell the Council that humanity requests a formal assembly in 6 hours. What will you tell them? Tobias Gray, poet and diplomat, closed his eyes. When he opened them again, Jen Kara saw something that had been hiding beneath 63 years of gentle philosophy. The truth, he said quietly. That we chose peace. And they made us choose again. Captain Helena Voss stood on the bridge of the Merchant's Promise, watching her crew move with practiced efficiency. To any observer, they were simply preparing for another trade run, loading containers, checking navigation systems, performing routine maintenance. But Helena knew better. She'd known for 20 years. Captain, we're receiving priority Omega, her communications officer said quietly. Helena felt her heart rate slow, not speed up. This was the moment they'd trained for, hoped would never come, but prepared for constantly. Authenticate. Authentication confirmed. Code, broken vow. Around the bridge, every officer stopped moving. These weren't merchants. They'd never been merchants. They were soldiers who'd spent 2 decades pretending, waiting, watching. Helena's fingers moved across her command console, entering a sequence she'd memorized but never used. Throughout the ship, panels slid away revealing weapons systems. The cargo bay floor retracted, exposing missile arrays. The ship's outer hull shifted as armor plating locked into combat configuration. The Merchant's Promise had been a warship all along. All hands, this is the captain, Helena said, her voice steady and cold. Sanctuary protocol is active. We are no longer merchants. Remember your training. Remember why we waited. Across human space, 300 merchant vessels performed the same transformation. Peaceful trading stations rotated, exposing military-grade sensor arrays. Cultural centers on human colony worlds opened underground hangars containing ships that had been built in secret, maintained in silence, ready for a war everyone hoped would never come. At Unity Station, Director James Okonkwo arrived at the council chamber with no assistants, no guards, no friendly smile. He was a compact man with silver temples and the bearing of someone who'd carried heavy secrets for far too long. The assembled species watched nervously as he activated a holographic display. What appeared shocked them into absolute silence. Military installations on every human world. Fleet positions. Weapon specifications. Defense networks that made the galaxy's most aggressive empires look like children with sticks. For 63 years, Director Okonkwo said quietly, humanity has served this council as peacemakers. We have mediated your disputes, taught your children music, shared our art and philosophy. We did this genuinely. We did this with our whole hearts. Zet Mora, the warrior delegate, leaned forward. You lied to us? No. Okonkwo's voice remained calm. We chose peace. But choice requires options. You cannot choose peace unless you're capable of war. We were always capable. We simply decided not to use that capability. Jen Kara's crystalline form flickered with confused colors. But why? Why hide this? Because the galaxy needed to see that peace was possible. Tobias Gray spoke from his seat, looking older than he had that morning. If we'd arrived as warriors, we'd have been just another military power. Instead, we showed you that choosing peace was valuable, meaningful, worthy of respect. And now, a delegate whispered. Okonkwo's expression hardened. Now the Velshera Collective has slaughtered 10,000 people under our protection. They've made it clear that our peaceful choice means nothing to them. So we're making a different choice. The hologram shifted to show human fleet movements. Ships converging from across the galaxy with military precision that took decades to develop, moving in formations that spoke of constant training, constant readiness. The Velshera representative's 1,000 voices buzzed with what might have been laughter. The gentle humans think to frighten the collective? You are poets and musicians. We are infinite. We are inevitable. Director Okonkwo turned to face the grotesque fusion of flesh and metal. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, which somehow made it more terrifying. We wrote the Iliad about the fall of Troy. We composed requiems for our dead. We painted Guernica to remember the horror of war. We are poets and musicians because we know what war truly is. You're about to learn the difference between species that never learned to fight and species that learned to stop. The collective does not fear. You should. The 2 words hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Within hours, human fleets reached Velshera-occupied space. Captain Helena Voss's task force arrived first at the mining world of Kepler's Edge, recently conquered by the hive mind. Captain, they're hailing us, her communications officer reported. They're laughing. Let them. Helena pulled up tactical displays. The Velshera had 6 warships in orbit, each bristling with weapons designed to intimidate through sheer size. They looked like floating fortresses of death. Helena's fleet looked like merchant ships that had sprouted guns. All ships, execute pattern theta. Helena's voice carried no emotion, no excitement, no anger. Just purpose. The human fleet didn't charge. They didn't posture. They simply moved with such perfect coordination that it looked choreographed. Every ship knew exactly where every other ship would be, creating overlapping fields of fire with mathematical precision. The Velshera opened fire first. Massive energy beams lanced through space. And missed. Human ships weren't where the targeting computers expected them to be. They'd predicted the Velshera firing patterns, calculated the optimal evasion paths, and moved with timing so perfect it seemed like precognition. Then the humans fired back. Not with massive, intimidating weapons. With small, precise strikes that hit power nodes, weapon systems, engine cores. Within 90 seconds, all 6 Velshera warships were drifting, disabled but intact, crews alive but helpless. This is Captain Voss to Velshera forces. Your ships are disabled. Your crews are unharmed. You have 1 hour to evacuate the planet's surface before we begin ground operations. This is your only warning. On Unity Station, the Council watched the battle footage in stunned silence. The efficiency was more frightening than any display of raw power could have been. They're not even angry, Jenkara whispered, her crystal form trembling. That's what terrifies me. No rage, no pride, no joy in victory. Just execution of purpose. Zet Mora, veteran of 100 battles, nodded slowly. I've fought many species. The dangerous ones are those who love war. But these humans... He paused, struggling for words. They understand war. That makes them something far worse. Director Okonkwo watched his people's military unfold across the galaxy like a precise instrument finally used for its intended purpose. He felt no satisfaction, no triumph. Only the heavy weight of necessity. Tobias Gray stood beside him. James, do you think we'll ever be seen as peacemakers again? Okonkwo was quiet for a long moment. I think the galaxy will finally understand what our peace actually meant. We weren't weak. We were choosing strength through restraint. He gestured to the displays showing human forces moving with devastating efficiency. This is what we were restraining. The Velshera Collective, for the first time in its existence, felt something its 1,000 minds had never experienced: uncertainty. The gentle species that wrote poetry and taught children songs had transformed into something that fought with terrifying competence. And humanity's fleets were only beginning their advance. The storm had awakened, and it moved with the patience of species that knew exactly how destructive storms could be. General Patricia Osei had never wanted this command. For 30 years, she trained soldiers who she hoped would never fight, maintained weapons she prayed would never fire, and prepared strategies she wished would gather dust forever. Now, standing on the bridge of the assault carrier Vigilant, she watched her troops descend toward Sanctuary Haven like drops of controlled rain. Ground teams report minimal resistance, her tactical officer reported. Velshera forces are retreating. Patricia's jaw tightened. They're not used to enemies who fight back effectively. Maintain discipline. Rules of engagement remain strict. Disable, contain, minimize casualties. What made the assault terrifying to observers wasn't its brutality, but its precision. Human soldiers moved through Sanctuary Haven's ruins like surgeons, not butchers. They identified Velshera military targets with perfect accuracy, used non-lethal force whenever possible, and established safe corridors for fleeing civilians, even Velshera civilians. In the refugee center's basement, a young boy named Dmitri huddled with 47 other survivors. He was 12 years old, thin and scared, clutching a datapad that held pictures of his family. He'd watched the Velshera kill his parents. He'd hidden for 3 days, surviving on rainwater and fear. When the door burst open, he flinched, expecting death. Instead, a human soldier knelt before him, removing her helmet. She had kind eyes and scars on her face that spoke of old battles. Hey there, little one. My name is Sergeant Rosa Chen. We're here to take you home. Dmitri stared at her, then at the other soldiers securing the area with quiet efficiency. Are you going to kill them? The Velshera? Rosa was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. We're going to stop them from hurting anyone else. There's a difference. But they killed, his voice broke. They killed everyone. Rosa placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. I know. And we're going to make sure they can't do it again. But we won't become what they are. We remember who we chose to be, even when we have to fight. Around them, other soldiers distributed medical supplies, food, and blankets to survivors. No celebration. No triumph. Just quiet, professional compassion mixed with lethal competence. Across Velshera space, the pattern repeated. Human forces struck military targets with surgical precision while establishing humanitarian corridors for civilians. They disabled rather than destroyed when possible. They documented war crimes but didn't commit vengeance killings. They fought with the terrible efficiency of people who understood war's purpose, to end itself as quickly as possible. On Unity Station, the Council watched footage of human ground operations. A Then delegate, whose species had warred for centuries, spoke with disbelief. They coordinate ground and orbital forces perfectly. No wasted movements. No unnecessary destruction. I've studied military tactics for 80 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Because they practice something we've forgotten, Jenkara said softly, her crystalline form pulsing with somber blue light. Discipline born from regret. They're not good at war because they love it. They're good at war because they've spent centuries learning to hate it efficiently. The final confrontation came at the Velshera Central Nexus, a massive biological station where the hive mind's primary nodes existed. Human fleets surrounded it in perfect formation, weapons primed but not firing. Director Okonkwo transmitted personally. Hive Prime Nexus. You have 24 hours to surrender your military forces and submit to galactic justice. Your civilian populations will not be harmed. Your culture will not be erased. But your capacity to wage war ends today. The 1,000 voices buzzed with defiance. The collective does not surrender. We are infinite. We will. You will comply, Okonkwo interrupted, his calm voice somehow more commanding than any shout. Or we will systematically dismantle every military asset you possess. We've studied your network topology. We know which nodes are military and which are civilian. We can separate them. The question is whether you force us to prove it. Silence. For the first time since the Velshera became a hive mind, they experienced collective doubt. Why? The voices asked, genuinely confused. Why not destroy us? You have the power. Because, Okonkwo said quietly, we're not trying to win a war. We're trying to end one. There's a difference. 12 hours later, the Velshera military surrendered. 3 weeks after that, Dimitri stood in a memorial garden on Unity Station. Tobias Gray had helped design it, a place where names of the fallen from Sanctuary Haven were carved into living wood that grew around them, keeping their memory alive. The boy traced his parents' names with small fingers. Ambassador Gray? Tobias, looking even older now, knelt beside him. Yes, Dimitri? Everyone says humans are scary now. That you were hiding what you really were. What do you think? Dimitri was quiet for a long moment. I think you were hiding what you didn't want to be. And when you had to be it anyway, you tried really hard to be it in the best way possible. Tobias felt tears sting his eyes. That's exactly right, my boy. The final council session was subdued. No celebration. No triumph. Just a galaxy trying to understand what it had learned. Tobias Gray stood to address them one last time as humanity's ambassador. His voice carried the weight of 2 generations of peaceful service and 3 weeks of necessary war. For 63 years, we showed you one version of humanity, the version we chose to be. Some of you feel betrayed, learning we were capable of this all along. He gestured to displays showing human military might. But we never lied. We chose peace. We built our merchant fleet to be dual-purpose not because we wanted war, but because we'd learned that hoping for peace isn't enough. You must also be prepared to defend it. Jenkara spoke, her voice musical but sad. Will you remain as peacemakers, Ambassador? After what we've seen. Tobias looked at her with profound weariness. That depends on the galaxy. We didn't start this war. We tried everything to prevent it. 10,000 people died before we responded. If the galaxy wants our poetry and philosophy, we will gladly provide them. If the galaxy wants our protection against those who choose violence, we will provide that too. But understand this. He paused, letting the weight of his next word settle. We are more dangerous as peacemakers than we ever were as warriors. Because we know the cost. We remember what war does. We've studied our own history, the trenches, the atomic fire, the genocides, the horror we inflicted on ourselves. We became peacemakers because we understood war so completely. And that understanding makes us far more frightening than species who simply know how to fight. What happens now? Zetmora asked, the warrior who'd once mocked human gentleness. Director Okonkwo stood beside Tobias. Now we choose again. We will maintain our military readiness, that's not negotiable anymore. But we will also continue teaching music, writing poetry, mediating disputes. We are both things. We always were. The species that learned peace, Genkara said softly, is more dangerous than the species that never knew war. Yes, Tobias agreed. Because we know exactly what we're preventing. And we know exactly what we're capable of when prevention fails. In the memorial garden, General Patricia Osei found Dimitri sitting alone. She'd taken personal responsibility for his care until they could locate his extended family. General, he asked, will there be more wars? Patricia sat beside him, this soldier who'd spent 30 years preparing for war and 3 weeks executing it with perfect discipline. I hope not, Dimitri. We'll do everything we can to prevent them. But if there are, then we'll do what we did this time. We'll remember who we are. We'll use only the force necessary. We'll protect the innocent. We'll end it as quickly as possible. And then we'll go back to teaching music and writing poetry and trying to be better. That sounds really hard. Patricia smiled sadly. It is. But the alternative, becoming comfortable with war, enjoying it, seeking it, that's worse. The difficulty is what keeps us human. Far across the galaxy, Captain Helena Voss oversaw the decommissioning of weapons systems on the Merchant's Promise. The ship would return to being what it appeared, a merchant vessel. But everyone aboard would remember what they truly were, what they'd always been prepared to be. Captain, her first officer asked, do you think we'll have to do this again? Helena looked at the stars, thinking of poetry and violence, of choices and consequences, of the terrible burden of being a species that understood both peace and war. I hope not, she said quietly. But if we do, we'll be ready. We'll always be ready. Because that's the price of choosing peace, you must be capable of defending it. And that's the burden we carry, so others don't have to. Across humanity's worlds, soldiers returned to civilian life. Weapons were maintained but stored. Battle-ready fleets resumed merchant operations. And in schools across human space, children learned history, both the poetry of peace and the terrible efficiency of war. They learned that humanity had chosen peace not from weakness, but from understanding. And they learned that sometimes, the greatest act of peace is being strong enough to end war decisively when all other choices fail. The galaxy had learned what humanity was. Now humanity had to decide what it would become, carrying the weight of both their gentle philosophy and their terrible competence. In the meditation hall where this had all begun, Tobias Gray read poetry again to a smaller, quieter audience. But now when he spoke of promises to keep and miles to go before sleep, everyone understood the weight those words carried. Peace was a choice. And choices had consequences. And humanity would continue choosing, again and again, bearing both the burden and the responsibility of being the species that understood war well enough to dedicate themselves to preventing it. That was their gift to the galaxy. And their curse. And their purpose.